Sadly, in our day, there are those who face physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, mental abuse. But it's that mental that I want to talk about because that's what's motivating Joseph to write this record. As many of you know, there are several accounts of the first vision. The one that we're going to be studying today is the 1838 account that we have canonized in the Pearl of Great Price. What we see here, though, is a major attempt on the part of Joseph Smith to get the story out because the story has been twisted as people have spread rumors and falsehoods about the rise of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Many of you know that I study anti-religious rhetoric. That was my PhD emphasis, trying to make sense of how people attack the faith of one another. And mental abuse is a pretty good way to describe it. There's so much leverage of rhetoric to try to convince people not to believe. And typically a rise in anti-religious rhetoric accompanies a rise in the religion that's being attacked. There's not a whole lot of anti-Shakerism right now, since there's only 2 living Shakers left. But in the 1800s, there was all kinds of anti-Shakerism because Shakerism was on the rise. Well, Joseph Smith's movement, what people considered that anyway, actually, the Church of Jesus Christ, was on the ascent in the 1830s. And yet opposition was increasing as a result. 1838, the Saints are being driven out of Missouri under threat of extermination. Joseph ends the year in Liberty Jail, no liberty for him. And it's during that time period, facing so much opposition, that he wants to set the record straight. And so he has this history recorded. Notice the way he puts it in the very first verse of what we now have canonized in Scripture. Owing to the many reports which have been put in circulation by evil-disposed and designing persons. And yes, that's what he was up against. He's been facing them for the last decade plus. But to see what the saints are trying to get through, evil-disposed and designing persons, there is a design out to get them. There is a disposition that is evil-inspired. These reports that are in relation to the rise and progress of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, all of which have been designed by the authors thereof to militate against its character as a church and its progress in the world. Militate, strong word there. We don't want people to think this as a church. Let's try to remove that characteristic and try to make it into some kind of thinly veiled theocracy that is out for world domination. Oh, that's going to get people up in arms. Or some kind of get-rich-quick scheme. It did start with tales of a gold Bible after all. Is that all that Joseph Smith is after? Well, no. This is a church. And yes, it is progressing in the world. But that's what people are alarmed about. With all that as motivation, Joseph says, I have been induced to write this history. And notice the way he describes its purpose: to disabuse the public mind and put all inquirers after truth in possession of the facts, as they have transpired, in relation both to myself and the church, so far as I have such facts in my possession. Get it from the horse's mouth, instead of playing telephone where I heard this and they heard that. And what does anybody actually know what's going on with so-called Mormonism? There were so many rumors and reports circulating. And the ones that were put out there by evil-disposed and designing persons, of course, are going to militate against its character. So here's the news. One of the keys of interfaith dialogue that Krister Stendahl described was make sure you listen to adherents instead of opponents. That's only fair. I want to hear from someone who knows, someone who's experienced it, and they can give their perspective. So that's what Joseph is offering. But the language that he uses before that, to disabuse the public mind, suggests that the public mind has been abused already, as far as what they've been tricked into thinking about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Old Joe Smith and his gold Bible. Oh, those Mormons out there on the frontier. I'm sorry to tell you, but your mind has been abused. My second master's degree thesis was about how people presented the story of the Book of Mormon in newspaper accounts from 1830 up to 1844, the lifetime of Joseph Smith. And in my research, I was blown away at how much abusing of the public mind was going on. The circulation of newspapers across America, where editors are just trying to drum up support, and so they're going to sensationalize all kinds of stories. They're not going to cross-check or source check. They're just going to quote, hey, this is a story that's spreading. It's selling newspapers, so maybe it'll sell some of mine. And no one seemed to care about the contents of the Book of Mormon. They were just up in arms over thoughts of angels and gold Bibles and stone spectacles and anything they could do to sensationalize the story. That is still happening today. And one of the things that I wrestle with constantly is not just the history of anti-religious rhetoric, but the current targeting of faith that's going on all around us. I'll put it this way. In my study of anti-religious rhetoric, whether it's anti-Mormonism or anti-Semitism or anti-Shakerism or anti-Methodism, typically it is guilty of what I call the 3 S's. It is number one S, sensational. Try to shock and awe people into moving from a rational exploration into an emotional reaction. A knee-jerk kind of like, whoa, up in arms, I can't believe these things are happening. Now, that's one S. The second S is superficial or simplistic. Take whichever S you choose. Let's take the story and oversimplify it. Let's give you a superficial approach to, or an understanding of this, just enough to unsettle you, not enough to get your feet back underneath you. I had one anti-Mormon I met who said to me point blank, you're banking on your church members not learning their history. Because as soon as they learn their history, they're out of the church. They know too much. And I said, oh, I understand what you're saying with that. But with all due respect, it's you that hopes our hopes our members don't understand enough of our history. You want to give them just enough that they freak out over things, but not the rest of the story, so they understand how and why some of those things might have taken place. As Rick Turley used to say, amazing historian himself, former assistant church historian, don't study church history too little. If you're going to go in, go all the way in. And you'll go from simplicity through complexity to simplicity on the other side of complexity, with testimony not only intact, but stronger than before. You understand what the saints were up against, and the fact they made it through is awe-inspiring. You understand that the danger of that? The third S, by the way, is selective. Not only are things being given that are sensational and superficial, but typically very selective as far as what sources they're drawing on. And let's give the worst possible framing of information when there are other sources that help balance things out. This is the court case where the lawyers for the prosecution are the only ones permitted to speak, and no cross-examination, no pushback or defense witnesses allowed from the lawyers for the defense. Polemicism versus apologetics is a constant contest throughout religious history, including ours. But please understand what we're up against in terms of a public mind that's already been abused against the truth. This year, as we study Joseph Smith history today and next week, and the Doctrine and Covenants and the history that goes behind those revelations for the rest of this year, I hope we keep in mind what we're up against. And we'll, number one, exercise faith. That helps tamp down the sensationalism. I hope we will see things in context and big picture understanding of things, including the view from the plan of salvation itself. That will help us overcome the superficiality of things. And I hope we will find true information from accurate sources, which will help push back against some of the selectivity that's out there. That is what Joseph is trying to do from the very beginning, and I'm grateful for it.